Hello, my name is Leslie Fafita with Providencesaurus, and I'm here to share with you some of the bugs that we have found in BEEST 12.12 and some workaround options that we have for you uh, regarding those bugs. Okay, so we released this new version of BEEST 12.12 back on February 5th and immediately started receiving um, comments from people who have issues um, with the model with Beast. So I want to talk about what happened, why we're seeing so many issues, tell you what is affected by the bugs we're seeing right now in Beast. We're going to talk about some specific errors that have been coming up. One has to do with spaces in the file name. One has to do with putting receptor inputs in Beast with partitions. Another has to do with output file naming conventions, specifically with the maxi files and maxdcont files. There's another output file issue that has to do with unused source groups, and that affects the plot files or the GRF files. Then we'll talk about what we're doing next to fix all of these issues and some suggestions about how to continue modeling in the meantime. So, what happened? Um, if you have been reading the little teasers from us, you'll know that BEEST 12.12 includes some pretty large structural updates that has to do with the inclusion of what are now receptor networks. So you should be able to choose which receptor grids or groups of discrete receptors you'd like to model within each individual AirMod run. That's a pretty big change. There's also a change about allowing us to select subgroups of sources that we want to include in a particular uh, AirMod run rather than just using all the sources that are in the Beast file. So these are pretty big updates to Beast, and we have been working on them for quite a while. And when EPA released the newest versions of the AirMod modeling system, that's AirMod, AirMet, Air Surface, and AirMap, version 24142, we were nearing the end of creating the BEEST 12.12 updates with the receptor network and source group selections. So at that time, we thought, all right, let's go ahead and incorporate the new EPA updates that go with 24142. Those changes are relatively simple compared with previous versions of AirMod. So we'll go ahead and do that and also incorporate these larger structural changes that we've been working on so far. Completing the inclusion of the receptor networks and source group selections in BEEST 12.12 was a little more complicated than we thought, and it was important to get a version of BEEST out that ran AirMod 24142. And because of those two things, we abbreviated the process of testing BEEST 12.12, which was absolutely a mistake. We really wanted to have a version of BEEST out that included AirMod 24142 by January 28th, 2025. That was the original effective date of the Appendix W updates, which kind of includes AirMod 24142. However, the effective date of the Appendix W updates has been delayed until March 21st, 2025. Now, I don't think that necessarily means that you don't have to use AirMod 24142. EPA is free to issue updates to AirMod without having to go through a rulemaking process. It's the Appendix W part of it that doesn't, go into effect until March. But it wouldn't surprise me if your regulatory agency is already requiring you to use AirMod 24142. One of the errors that we're seeing has to do with spaces in the BEAST file name. Sometimes when we have a BEAST file, BEAST 12.12, when BEAST goes to write the sum file in the DTA, the line item that says, I want you to record a sum file, it doesn't put the quotes around the name of the sum file. So if your sum file, if the file itself has a space in it, it doesn't output this line correctly. So one way to avoid this potential problem in BEEST 12.12 is to simply remove any spaces in your BEEST file name. So for example, if your file name is important space project.bst, just change it to important project without the space, or important underscore project, something like that. That should help you avoid that particular type of error. Now, another thing that we're seeing is problems with receptor inputs with partitions. So what is this all about? BEEST lets us partition runs into lots of different pieces. And to do this, BEEST makes many copies of the AirMod input file, but it only includes a subset of the receptors in each of the partitions. Now, each of the AirMod partitions has to have at least one receptor in it in order for AirMod to run correctly. If there's no receptors, AirMod, there's nothing AirMod can do, so it crashes. So if we tell BEEST, for example, to make 10 partitions in a particular AirMod run, but we only have 5 receptors in the BEEST file, BEEST is not going to be able to recombine the files. It'll go ahead and make 10 partition runs, but only some of them will run and some of them won't. And then when you try and combine them later, it won't combine correctly. So in order to avoid this particular situation, BEEST has this little safety feature that doesn't let us enter more partitions than we have receptors for. So if in the same scenario, we only have 5 receptors in our model, and we try and tell BEEST, I want you to put in 10 partitions, we'll get a little pop-up error that says, hey, you can't put in 10 partitions. You have to change this number to something that makes sense based on the number of receptors. Okay, so this makes sense. What's the problem? Okay, in this particular example that I have right here, we have a BEEST file that has 740 receptors in it. And the last run I did, I ran it over 3 partitions. The problem comes in when I decide to make changes to the receptor grid. So say I've got in here and I'm like, you know what, I don't like this receptor grid. I'm going to delete it and start over. And I hit the button at the top that says delete all receptors. And so that's changed my receptor total to 0. But I still have that number of 3 partitions down in the bottom. So when I try and leave this page, I get the pop-up error that says, hey, you don't have enough receptors to warrant 3 partitions. You need to change that. And that's absolutely right. It doesn't make sense with no receptors in the model. So what I want to do is click the little button under local partition receptors options that says do not partition parentheses default. That's what I want to change it to. But when I try and click that button, I just get that arrow pop up again. It won't let me select the do not partition option. I can try and put a different number inside the number of partitions, like change it to 0. It won't let me do that either. So in this situation, there's no way to even get off this menu screen without just plain closing your BEEST file. And if you are in the unfortunate situation where you've saved your BEEST file, like you've hit Control S, after deleting all the receptors, when you bring BEEST back up again, when you try and open this file again, you're going to run into the same problem. It won't let you make any changes to the receptors. And in that case, you'll just have to delete the BEEST file altogether. At this time, with this version of BEEST 12.12. Hopefully in the future, definitely in the future, this won't be a problem, but it is for now. Okay, workaround. We can work around this issue. The only thing we need to do is just be diligent that we have the partition selection on do not partition while we're messing around with the receptors. If I want to delete my receptors, I've got to make sure I've clicked do not partition first. And that will prevent me from accidentally getting stuck in that loop. Another issue we're having is it's another partitioning issue, and it has to do with how we're naming some of the output files. So, when you run AirMod, it creates a lot of different output files. There's just a list file, there's a plot file, and you might have something like a maxi file or a maxdcont file. There's a number of different outputs you can select in AirMod. Now, if you're doing a run like this and partitioning it, all of those output files need to have a little suffix on the end that tells BEEST which partition we're talking about. So we'll have partition 01, 02, 03, whatever the partition number needs to be. And so all of the files, the LSTs, the GRFs, the max files, the maxdcont files, all of those have to have that little partition number at the end so we can recombine them later. Now, we've seen an issue specifically with the maxi files and also with the maxdcont files where BEEST 12.12 is not putting the right little suffix numbers at the end of those file names. So when that happens and you try and run AirMod, two things can happen. One is AirMod might not run at all. We've seen it run for maybe one partition, but not others. And even if you do get it to run, you might not get it to recombine. So if you are in the situation where you're using one of these output files that won't recombine, you'll have to use the workaround. The workaround is don't partition your runs or don't select the output file types like the maxi file or the maxdcont file that have this problem. I know that is an awful, awful workaround. One of BEEST's best features is the ability to partition your run into a bunch of pieces and let it run quickly. But that is where we are at the moment for the maxi files and the maxdcont files. It will run. It doesn't seem to have a problem with the regular AirMod output files, the LSTs, or the plot files, the GRFs. So a basic AirMod run this won't be a problem. But if you're using some maybe not unusual, but any other output file types, you might run into this problem. We do have another output file issue. It's a little bit different than the one we just talked about. This one has to do with what I'm calling unused source groups. And it really has to do with the plot files associated with source groups. So when you put together a BEEST file, it could contain lots of different kinds of sources, lots of different pollutants, and lots of source groups. And it's possible that not all of the source groups apply to all of the pollutants. For example, let's say we're modeling a manufacturing site with a lot of different source types. They have engines, they have turbines, they have truck traffic, they have loading, and then they also have parts washers. Parts washers are just like a bin that includes a cleaning agent, and you put your tools in there and you clean them in the parts washer. Parts washers emit VOCs. And say, for example, we have some parts washers at this facility that emit toluene in particular. And so we want to model toluene by itself. The parts washers don't emit NOx or CO or anything else. Just the only thing we care about from the parts washers is toluene. So we're also making a specific source group in the model that we're calling part wash. And the part wash group includes all of the parts washers on the site. Okay. Now, let's say we want to go ahead and model NOx. We're not going to be modeling toluene right now. So we'll tell BEEST to go ahead and create an AirMod input file for the NOx run. Now, it shouldn't include the parts washers at all because there's no NOx emissions from the parts washers. And BEEST knows that. It knows not to include the sources, the parts washers themselves. And it also knows not to include the source group part wash because none of the component sources in that group appear in the Nox run. But what's going on here in BEEST 12.12 is BEEST still thinks we need to create a plot file or a GRF for all of the source groups in the BEEST file, not only the source groups that are in the specific AirMod run. So what happens is BEEST is creating these extra lines at the very bottom of the input file. They're in the OU plot file pathway way at the bottom. And it's a line that is telling AirMod to create a plot file, but it's not telling AirMod what source group to create the plot file for because they're not there. So the way to work around this at the moment is to manually go into your DTA file and delete the OU plot file lines, the extra ones that are missing a source group name. This is another not great solution, but if you want to use BEEST or run AirMod with BEEST 12.12, and you're in this particular situation where you have unused source groups, that is one way to do it. Okay, what's next? Providencesaurus is reviewing each of these bugs and we will correcting them. We are working on that now, and really even more important than that is we need to spend a little bit of time thoroughly testing our next version of BEEST, which is going to be BEEST 12.13, to make sure everything's really resolved. There were an especially large number of errors in BEEST 12.12, and we don't want to see that again. So we're going to make sure that we get everything fixed for the next release, BEEST 12.13. Now, we know that y'all need BEEST 12.13 sooner than later. So to kind of restrict that time schedule, we've decided to make BEEST 12.13 dedicated to the bug fixes in 12.12 only. We're not going to try and incorporate any new features in BEEST in 12.13 to try and get this resolved as quickly as we can. Also, as you're using BEEST 12.12 and you notice any other issues, please tell us. We want to make sure we get everything corrected for the next version of BEEST. In the meantime, what do we do now? Despite the fact that there's so many problems with BEEST 12.12, I'm sure all of the regulatory agencies are still expecting you to run AirMod 24142. How do we do that? A couple of options you have here to keep running the model in the meantime while we fix up BEEST. You can keep using BEEST 12.12 and use the workaround for your bugs. If you have some pretty simple runs, you might not be in the situations that actually cause the errors that we've been seeing so far. It depends on what you're doing. So it's possible that BEEST 12.12 is going to work just fine for your specific runs, but that is not always the case. Another option is to uninstall BEEST 12.12 and reinstall BEEST 12.11. So both BEEST 12.12 and BEEST 12.11 are available on our downloads page on our website. Now, the older version of BEEST 12.11, includes AirMod 23132, an older version of AirMod. But we can link it to the current version of AirMod 24142. To do this, let's say we've gone ahead and made sure that BEEST 12.11 is installed. And then we go to the File menu in BEEST 12.11 and select Preferences, and then we click on the Model Selection tab. Now, in the Model Selection tab, you can see the pathways to a bunch of different components that are used by BEEST, including the AirMod executable file. So kind of to the right of this little box, there's an option that says Browse. If you click on Browse, you can navigate to another place on your hard drive where you saved a copy of the AirMod 24142 executable. That is available for download directly from EPA SCRAM. We haven't made any edits to the EPA executable, so you can use that directly. If you have trouble finding that, we can send you a link. Just let us know. But that's one way to continue to use BEEST 12.11, but with the newer version of AirMod 24142. So for the moment, this is kind of our recommendation. If you would like to continue to use the BEEST GUI for all the AirMod 24142 system components, we suggest first for AirMod, when you're running AirMod, not AirMet, AirSurface, AirMap, but just AirMod, it's best to use BEEST version 12.11. That'll help you avoid all of those bugs that we talked about earlier. After you link it to the AirMod 24142 executable. So you can go ahead and run AirMod 24142 with the older version of BEEST. The only caveat to that is GRSM. If you're doing an ozone limiting NOx run and you're using the GRSM tier 3 NOx limiting method, that is probably not going to work correctly with BEEST. Well, it's not going to work correctly with BEEST 12.11 because GRSM went from being a beta option to becoming a regulatory option in 24142, and that change isn't reflected correctly in BEEST 12.11. So if you're using GRSM, I don't really have a workaround for you, but for any other scenario, you should be fine to run AirMod with BEEST 12.11. However, if you are running AirMet, AirSurface, or AirMap, it is better to use BEEST 12.12. Those updates to the model are not really related to the larger structural issues that we made regarding the receptors and the source selection. So they shouldn't have the same kind of bugs that we're seeing in the other parts of BEEST. This is going to require you to uninstall and reinstall different versions of BEEST depending on what you're doing at the time. I did want to let you know that you will not need to put in new license keys anytime you uninstall and reinstall BEEST, as long as you're doing it on the same computer. So that's at least one headache that you won't have. So apologies for all of this. We are working on BEEST 12.13, and we'll get that out as soon as we can, but with a more thorough testing evaluation period to make sure we get everything addressed. Okay, my name is Leslie Fafita. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. So what is affected by these bugs in BEEST? Well, first of all, BEEST by itself is affected. And then if you use BEEST Express to do your model runs, the BEEST Express model is also affected with very similar issues that we're seeing in BEEST.